Phoenix, Arizona, March 2023. The Desert Sky Museum of Ancient Manuscripts was hosting a traveling exhibit called Voices from the Past, the Dead Sea Scrolls and Lost Gospels. Teresa Castellano, a Sunday school teacher at St. Catherine's Parish, had been waiting months to bring her family. Her husband, Dr. David Castellano, a history professor at Arizona State University, specializing in the Roman Empire, was skeptical, but agreed. Their son, Mario, just 5 years old, was more interested in the gift shop dinosaurs than ancient parchment. But that afternoon, everything changed. Mario was standing in front of display case 7, which contained fragments of manuscripts from Qumran Cave 4, when his small body went rigid. His eyes rolled back. Teresa screamed as her son collapsed, his head striking the marble floor with a sickening crack. The museum erupted into chaos. Security called paramedics. David cradled Mario's unconscious body, his professorial composure shattered. At Phoenix Children's Hospital, the CT scan showed no fractures, no bleeding, no neurological damage. The doctors called it a mystery seizure, possibly triggered by stress or dehydration. But when Mario opened his eyes 6 hours later, he looked at his mother with an expression that didn't belong on a kindergartner's face. Ancient, haunted, grief-stricken. And then he spoke. Not in English, not in Spanish, in a guttural flowing language that made Teresa's Catholic heart skip. Asher sarafet haeduyot ki hayeled asa niflaot sheyivlu et haimuna bapachad. David stared, speechless. Teresa's hands trembled as she whispered, "What did he just say?" A nurse, an Israeli immigrant named Ruth, stood frozen in the doorway. Her face had gone white. She translated in a shaking voice. He said they burned the testimonies because the child performed wonders that would consume the faith with fear. That's ancient Aramaic, 1st century Judean dialect. How does a 5-year-old know that? Before we continue, please consider subscribing to the channel and letting us know where you're watching from. We read every single comment and truly appreciate you taking the time to listen to the story. Before that terrifying afternoon at the museum, the Castellano family was perfectly, beautifully ordinary. Their home on Maple Ridge Drive in the Arcadia neighborhood of Phoenix was a modest ranch-style house with a desert landscaped front yard and a trampoline in the back. Every morning smelled like Teresa's famous cinnamon coffee and scrambled eggs. David would kiss his wife goodbye at 7:30, briefcase in hand, heading to Arizona State University, where he taught Roman History 301 and graded papers about Julius Caesar's military campaigns. He was a man of facts, timelines, and archaeological evidence. His office walls were covered with maps of ancient Rome, not crucifixes. Teresa was his opposite in the most complimentary way. She had grown up in a deeply Catholic family in Tucson, attended Mass every Sunday at St. Catherine's, and volunteered as the kindergarten Sunday school teacher. Her classroom was filled with felt-board stories of Noah's Ark and Daniel in the lion's den. She prayed the rosary every night before bed. And then there was Mario, 5 years old, gap-toothed, with his father's dark hair and his mother's warm brown eyes. He attended Roadrunner Elementary Kindergarten, where his teacher, Mrs. Lopez, said he was bright, social, and obsessed with dinosaurs. His bedroom was a shrine to Jurassic World. He had a T-Rex stuffed animal named Rexy that he refused to sleep without. On Wednesday afternoons, David coached Mario's soccer team, the Desert Lizards, a chaotic group of 5-year-olds who barely understood the concept of goals. On Friday nights, the family gathered on the couch for movie night. Mario's favorite was The Incredibles. He would leap off the couch cushions pretending to have superpowers, while Teresa laughed and David made popcorn. Bedtime meant 3 stories, a glass of water, and a whispered prayer that Teresa taught him. Now I lay me down to sleep. Everything was safe. Everything was normal. Everything made sense. Until it didn't. The Desert Sky Museum was crowded that Saturday afternoon. Families moved slowly through the dimly lit exhibition hall, where glass cases displayed fragments of ancient parchment, some no larger than a postage stamp, others spanning several columns of faded text. Teresa read every placard with reverence. David corrected historical inaccuracies under his breath. Mario dragged his feet, bored, asking when they could leave. Display case 7 contained fragments from Qumran Cave 4, part of the famous Dead Sea Scrolls discovery. The placard explained these were dated to approximately 50 BCE to 50 CE and contained biblical texts and sectarian writings. Mario stopped walking. Teresa noticed first. Her son stood frozen, staring at the fragments with an intensity that made her uneasy. "Mario, honey, you okay?" His eyes were locked on the ancient Hebrew letters behind the glass. His breathing became rapid, shallow. "David," Teresa called, her voice tight. David turned just as Mario's body went rigid. The boy's eyes rolled back, showing only whites. His knees buckled. Teresa screamed. Mario hit the marble floor hard, his skull cracking against the polished stone with a sound that made nearby visitors gasp. Security rushed over. Someone called 911. David dropped to his knees, cradling his son's unconscious head, blood seeping from a gash near his temple. Mario, can you hear me?" Nothing. The ambulance arrived in 8 minutes. At Phoenix Children's Hospital, Mario was rushed into emergency. The CT scan took 30 agonizing minutes. Dr. Patel emerged with cautious relief. No fractures, no brain bleeding, no swelling. They called it a febrile seizure, possibly triggered by museum lighting or stress, though Mario had no history of epilepsy. They stitched the head wound. 6 hours later, Mario's eyes opened. Teresa gripped his small hand, tears streaming. "Baby, you're okay. You're okay." But Mario wasn't looking at her with the eyes of a 5-year-old. He looked ancient, broken, and then he spoke in that impossible language, those words about burned testimonies and wonders and fear, and everything Teresa believed about reality shattered. The week following the hospital discharge became a nightmare painted in slow motion. Mario refused to touch Rexy, his beloved dinosaur. He wouldn't watch cartoons. When Teresa tried to read him bedtime stories, he stared through her with those ancient eyes and said nothing. Instead, he sat at the kitchen table for hours, drawing. Not dinosaurs, not superheroes. Architectural diagrams, precise, complex floor plans with measurements written in a script neither parent recognized. David brought the drawings to his colleague, Dr. Hassan Al-Fayed, a professor of ancient Near Eastern architecture. Hassan went pale. "David, these are floor plans of the Second Temple in Jerusalem. This level of detail is based on Josephus and Mishnaic texts. Where did you get these?" David's hands trembled. "My 5-year-old son drew them." On Tuesday evening, Mario spoke again in that guttural language. Teresa recorded it on her phone, terrified. He said, "Ani Elihu ben Joachim, Sofer Shel HaSanhedrin." She played it for Father Miguel at St. Catherine's. The priest's face drained of color. "He says his name is Elihu, son of Joachim, scribe of the Sanhedrin." On Wednesday, Mario told them he was ordered to record the childhood of Yeshua of Nazareth. He used that name, Yeshua, not Jesus. He described watching a boy no older than 7 heal a leper with a single touch in the streets of Nazareth. He described the boy commanding a dead sparrow to fly again, its wings erupting into life. He wept as he said the high priest Annas ordered all such testimonies destroyed, because they would make people fear the child rather than love the man he would become. On Friday, Mario provided coordinates, 31 degrees north, 35 degrees east. He described a cave 3 kilometers outside Nazareth, where he hid scrolls in clay jars before his execution. He knew the names of high priests that David had to verify in academic journals. Caiaphas, Annas, Eleazar ben Ananus. This was impossible, but it was happening. David became a man possessed by denial. Every evening after work, he brought home medical journals, articles on pediatric neurology, case studies of false memory syndrome. He sat at the dining room table highlighting passages about trauma-induced confabulation, about how the brain creates elaborate narratives to process injury. "It's the head trauma," he insisted, slamming a journal down in front of Teresa. "The seizure, the museum stimuli. His brain is misfiring, creating false memories from things he saw in those display cases." Teresa shook her head, rosary beads wrapped around her fingers. "David, he's speaking a language he's never been exposed to. He's drawing architectural plans. He knows names of priests from 2,000 years ago." David's voice rose. "Which means he saw something at the museum, a documentary, a book. Children are sponges, Teresa. This is neurological, not supernatural." The word supernatural hung between them like a grenade. Teresa did what she had to do. She recorded every word Mario spoke in Aramaic. She filmed him drawing the temple diagrams. She sent everything to Father Miguel without telling her husband. When Father Miguel called back, his voice was shaking. "Teresa, I've consulted with a colleague who specializes in ancient languages. What your son is speaking is not modern Aramaic. It's a Judean dialect from the 1st century. This is impossible." That night, David found the recordings on Teresa's phone. The argument that followed shattered the peace their home had always known. "You're encouraging him. You're making this worse," David shouted. "I'm trying to understand what's happening to our son," Teresa screamed back. "Our son needs a psychiatrist, not a priest." Their voices woke Mario. He stood in the hallway in his Superman pajamas, tears streaming, and began to scream. Not in English, in Aramaic. Words about flames, about scrolls burning, about hands throwing sacred texts into fire while he begged them to stop. He screamed until his voice broke, until Teresa held him sobbing against her chest, until David stood frozen, watching his rational world crumble. Father Miguel made a decision that would change everything. He contacted Dr. Miriam Feldman at Hebrew University in Jerusalem, a renowned archaeologist who had spent 30 years studying Second Temple Judaism and the Dead Sea Scrolls. He sent her the recordings, the drawings, everything. Dr. Feldman's initial email response was polite, but dismissive. "Father, I receive claims like this monthly. Children are suggestible. This is likely contamination from media exposure." But Father Miguel persisted. He sent her the linguistic analysis from his colleague. He sent Mario's architectural drawings with measurements that matched unpublished excavation data. 3 days later, Dr. Feldman booked a flight to Phoenix. She arrived on a Tuesday morning, jet-lagged and skeptical, her grey hair pulled into a tight bun, her eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. Teresa and David met her at their home, Mario sitting quietly on the couch. Dr. Feldman sat across from the boy, notebook open, recording device on. She spoke to him in modern Hebrew first. Mario stared blankly. Then she switched to modern Aramaic, the kind spoken in remote Syrian villages. Nothing. And then she spoke in ancient Aramaic, the reconstructed dialect of 1st century Judea, a language only a handful of scholars in the world could speak. Mario's head snapped up, his eyes locked onto hers, and he responded fluently. Dr. Feldman's pen fell from her hand. For 20 minutes they conversed. Mario described the interior, courtyards of Nazareth homes, the cooking ovens built into walls, the mikvaot ritual baths that recent digs had uncovered but weren't yet in academic publications. He recounted specific scrolls from Qumran Cave 4, describing their contents with precision that made Dr. Feldman's hands shake. He told her about the community rule, the war scroll, the Thanksgiving hymns. Then he described scrolls that had never been found, scrolls he claimed he had written and hidden. Dr. Feldman stood abruptly, walked to the kitchen, and called her colleague, Professor Joseph Lieberman at Hebrew University. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Joseph, I need you to listen to this. Everything we know is wrong." Dr. Feldman made calls that echoed through academic and governmental channels. Within 72 hours, she had arranged emergency travel authorization for the Castellano family and secured reluctant cooperation from the Israeli Antiquities Authority. Dr. Avi Cohen, director of excavations for the IAA, was blunt on the phone. "Miriam, this is insane. You're bringing a 5-year-old American child to direct an archaeological expedition based on alleged past life memories. Do you understand how this looks?" But Dr. Feldman's reputation carried weight. The family landed at Ben Gurion Airport on a Thursday morning. The heat hit them like a physical wall. Mario, who had been quiet during the entire flight, suddenly became agitated as they drove toward Jerusalem. He pressed his face against the van window, muttering in Aramaic. Teresa held his hand tightly. In Jerusalem, the IAA had arranged a meeting at their headquarters near the Israel Museum. Dr. Cohen, a stern man in his 60s with sun-weathered skin, sat across from Mario with barely concealed skepticism. "Young man, Dr. Feldman says you know where certain scrolls are hidden. Can you show us?" Mario ignored the toys they'd brought for him. Instead, he grabbed paper and colored pencils and began drawing with furious intensity. What emerged was a topographical map showing the hills outside Nazareth. He marked a specific location 3 kilometers northwest of the modern city. He drew the entrance to a cave system, showing how it would be concealed by a rock fall. He described the interior, a chamber approximately 4 meters deep with a shelf carved into the eastern wall. On that shelf, he said, were 14 clay jars sealed with pitch. Inside those jars were scrolls. His scrolls. The testimonies he had written about Yeshua's childhood before the High Council ordered their destruction. "They were going to kill me anyway," Mario said in perfect English, his voice flat and adult. "I was executed for heresy in the year 68 CE, 3 months before the Romans burned the temple. I hid the scrolls because the truth deserved to survive." The convoy of vehicles left Jerusalem at dawn, heading north through the Jezreel Valley toward Nazareth. Dr. Feldman, Dr. Cohen, 2 IAA archaeologists, a ground-penetrating radar technician, and the Castellano family. David sat rigid in the passenger seat, his rational mind fighting a losing battle against what he was witnessing. Mario sat in the back between his parents, eerily calm. When they reached the outskirts of Nazareth, Mario suddenly shouted, "Stop! Here!" Dr. Cohen frowned. "There's nothing here. This is just rural farmland and olive groves." But Mario was already unbuckling his seatbelt. They followed him off the paved road, through a grove of ancient olive trees, their gnarled trunks twisted by centuries. The boy moved with absolute certainty, never hesitating, leading them up a rocky hillside covered in thorny brush. David kept insisting. He could have seen this in a documentary. National Geographic does shows about Israel constantly. But Dr. Feldman shook her head. "David, this area has never been filmed for television. These hills aren't on tourist maps." Mario stopped at a section of hillside that looked like every other section. Unremarkable limestone rock covered in centuries of erosion and vegetation. "Here," he said simply. The radar technician, a woman named Ayala, set up her equipment. For 30 minutes she scanned the area while everyone waited in tense silence. Finally she looked up, her face pale. "There's a void, approximately 4 meters deep. The density readings suggest a chamber, possibly man-made, with a collapsed entrance." Dr. Cohen authorized excavation. As they began carefully removing rocks and soil, Mario spoke quietly. look for the blessing. I carved it myself above the entrance. 3 hours into the dig, one of the archaeologists called out. There, on a flat stone near what appeared to be a deliberately sealed opening, were carved letters. Paleo-Hebrew script, weathered but visible. Dr. Feldman read it aloud, her voice breaking. Baruch atah Adonai, shomer haemet. Blessed are you, Lord, keeper of truth. The excavation took 3 days of painstaking work. Each stone removed with archaeological precision, each layer of soil documented and catalogued. The Israeli sun beat down mercilessly. Volunteers brought water and shade tents. News crews tried to get close, but were kept back by IAA security. On the 3rd day, at approximately 2 in the afternoon, they breached the cave entrance. The sealed chamber exhaled air that hadn't moved in 2,000 years. Dr. Cohen entered first with a flashlight, Dr. Feldman right behind him. Their silence stretched for 30 seconds that felt like hours. Then Dr. Cohen's voice echoed from inside, barely a whisper. Dear God, they're here. 14 clay jars lined the carved shelf exactly as Mario had described. Each jar was sealed with pitch, cracked with age but intact. The dry climate of the Nazareth Hills had created perfect preservation conditions. They brought the jars out one by one into the filtered light of the excavation tent. Dr. Feldman's hands trembled as she carefully broke the seal on the first jar. Inside, scrolls of parchment, darkened with age but legible. She unrolled the first scroll with excruciating care. Ancient Aramaic script filled the columns. She began to read aloud, her voice shaking. In the 3rd year of his life, Yeshua ben Yosef touched a leper in the streets of Nazareth. The man's skin, which had been rotting with disease, became clean before our eyes. The child showed no fear. Teresa gasped, covering her mouth. David stood frozen, his entire world-view collapsing. Dr. Feldman continued. In his 7th year, he commanded a storm to cease while fishermen screamed in terror on the Sea of Galilee. The waters became glass. In his 9th year, he brought a dead sparrow back to life in the synagogue courtyard. The bird flew from his palm while the elders watched in horror. The scroll described miracles, dozens of them. A child who healed with a touch, who spoke with wisdom that terrified religious scholars, who performed wonders that made people fear him rather than love him. Mario stood at the tent entrance, tears streaming down his face, watching them discover what he had died to protect. Over the next week, as Dr. Feldman and her team carefully translated the scrolls in a secured laboratory at Hebrew University, the full truth emerged like a wound reopening across 2 millennia. The scrolls were not just accounts of miracles, they were a confession. The final scroll, written in a different hand, more hurried, more desperate, was Elihu's personal testimony. Dr. Feldman read it aloud to the assembled team, Mario sitting quietly in the corner. I am Elihu, son of Joachim, scribe to the High Council. I was ordered by the council, in consultation with early followers of the Way, to destroy all testimonies of Yeshua's childhood. They said the accounts were too powerful, too frightening for new believers. The miracles performed by the child, the wisdom spoken by one so young, these things made people fear him as a divine force rather than love him as a savior. The apostles who knew him as a man wanted the world to see his humanity first, his divinity revealed through his ministry and resurrection. They believed that stories of a 7-year-old commanding storms and raising dead birds would terrify rather than inspire. So they made a decision. The silent years, the gap in the Gospels, it was deliberate. Teresa wept openly. David stood with his hands over his face. The scroll continued. I understood their reasoning, but I could not destroy truth. These testimonies were written by witnesses, by people who saw the divine walking among them as a child. I copied them in secret. I hid them here, and for this I will be executed. The council has declared me a heretic, but I could not let this die." Mario stood and walked to the table where the ancient parchment lay. He touched it gently, reading the Aramaic script as easily as if it were a children's book. Tears streamed down his 5-year-old face. His voice was barely a whisper, but everyone heard it. "I couldn't let the truth die with me." The Israeli government moved swiftly. The cave site was sealed with armed guards. The scrolls were transported under military escort to the Israel Museum's climate-controlled preservation laboratory. Carbon dating was fast-tracked through 3 independent facilities in Israel, Oxford, and Arizona. The results would take weeks, but the world didn't wait. News of the discovery leaked within 48 hours. CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, every major network descended on Jerusalem. The story dominated headlines globally. 5-year-old boy leads archaeologists to lost gospels. Hidden scrolls reveal Jesus' childhood miracles. The Vatican issued a carefully worded statement calling for patience and scientific verification. Skeptics called it an elaborate hoax. Believers called it proof of the divine. The Castellano family returned to Phoenix exhausted, overwhelmed, and changed forever. For 3 days, Mario remained that ancient soul trapped in a child's body, speaking Aramaic, drawing symbols, weeping over memories of execution. And then, on a Tuesday morning, everything shifted. Teresa went to wake Mario for kindergarten. He sat up, rubbed his eyes, and said in his normal 5-year-old voice, "Mom, can we have pancakes?" Teresa's heart stopped. "Mario, baby, do you know where you are?" He looked at her confused. "Home? Duh. Can I have chocolate chips in my pancakes?" David rushed in. They tested him gently, showed him the drawings he'd made. Nothing. Showed him photos from Israel, the cave, the scrolls. Mario's eyes widened with innocent excitement. "Whoa, that looks cool. Did I really go there? Was it like Indiana Jones?" He didn't remember Elihu, didn't remember Aramaic, didn't remember dying 2,000 years ago. He asked if he could watch cartoons. He wanted to play with Rexy. He was 5 again. Teresa held him and sobbed. David held them both. That afternoon, Dr. Feldman called. Her voice was thick with emotion. "David, Teresa, the carbon dating results are confirmed across all 3 labs. The scrolls date to 68 CE plus or minus 3 years. They're authentic. Your son led us to the most significant archaeological discovery in modern history. The discovery of the Elihu scrolls, as they're now called, created a theological earthquake that continues to shake the foundations of Christianity." The Vatican requested immediate access, dispatching a delegation of cardinals and biblical scholars to Jerusalem. Pope Francis issued a statement acknowledging the scrolls as potentially authentic, while urging caution in interpretation. Protestant denominations split between those who see the scrolls as divine revelation and those who reject them as threatening to established doctrine. The question that haunts every believer is simple and terrifying. If Jesus performed miracles as a child, miracles so powerful they were deliberately erased from history, what does that mean for everything we thought we understood about his nature, his mission, his humanity? Scholars debate endlessly. Some argue the scrolls prove Jesus was divine from birth, not merely after baptism. Others say the early church fathers made the right choice in concealing these accounts to preserve Jesus' relatability. The scrolls remain in Jerusalem, sealed in climate-controlled vaults at the Israel Museum, available only to authorized researchers. But their existence has already changed everything. And what of Mario? He returned to kindergarten, to dinosaurs and cartoons and soccer practice. He doesn't remember being Elihu, doesn't remember the cave or the scrolls or speaking languages that died 2,000 years ago. But somewhere in his soul, deeper than memory, he carried a secret across lifetimes, a truth that waited 2 millennia to surface. This child gave humanity a gift, the complete story of who Jesus was, not just the man who died on the cross, but the boy who healed lepers and commanded storms and terrified the religious authorities with his impossible power. Now I ask you, do you believe in reincarnation? Do you believe souls carry missions across death itself? Comment below with your thoughts. Subscribe to this channel for more stories of the eternal soul, mysteries that challenge everything we think we know about life, death, and the journeys we take between them. Because somewhere in Phoenix, Arizona, Mario plays in his backyard, laughing and free. And somewhere in Jerusalem, ancient scrolls whisper truths that were buried for 2,000 years, waiting to be heard.